camera focuses tightly on the worn, calloused hands of Jake Ryan, 42, strong, deeply weathered, wearing a faded denim shirt and a worn-out baseball cap, trembling slightly as he tries to pour the last gallon of emergency gas into his sputtering, rattling Chevy Silverado on the dusty gravel shoulder of Highway 281 near Nebraska, an expanse of desolate, wind-swept plains that perfectly mirrors the absolute financial emptiness consuming the single father. He glances back anxiously at the cab where his two young children, Lily, 7, quiet, protective, and Noah, 5, perpetually dusty, clutching a stuffed lion, sit silently, their fear a constant, agonizing reminder of his failure to provide a stable life, a relentless, soul-crushing burden that defines his every desperate movement. The silence in the truck, a silence louder than any engine trouble, is the unbearable weight of their shared struggle, a constant test of his resilience as a single father. Suddenly, an impossibly sleek, expensive, and eerily silent Tesla Model S materializes out of the dusty haze, pulling up abruptly behind the sputtering truck, the jarring contrast of pristine wealth against his absolute destitution screaming of two diametrically opposed worlds colliding catastrophically on this lonely stretch of forgotten road, a profound moment of visible, class-based irony that hits him like a physical blow. Before Jake can even register the expensive car, the rear door of the Tesla swings open with an unnatural speed, and a flawlessly dressed woman, Alara Vance, 40s, sharp, impeccable in a severe business suit, but with an unmistakable flicker of pure, unadulterated terror in her eyes, throws a heavy, worn leather satchel onto the ground before collapsing onto the dusty shoulder, clearly injured but radiating an air of untouchable importance. The raw vulnerability of the woman, who seems to have just shed the entire weight of her perfectly composed, corporate life in that single, desperate moment, instantly triggers Jake's deep-seated, protective decency. The same instinct that makes him a devoted single father and forces him to momentarily override his survival instinct, the ultimate sacrifice of his own tenuous stability. He drops the gas can, his heart pounding a rhythm of sudden, inexplicable fear mixed with alarm, realizing this is no ordinary breakdown, as the faint, insistent chopping sound of a distant helicopter echoes momentarily in the vast emptiness, confirming that this woman's terror is not psychological, but real, immediate, and extremely dangerous, a horrifying realization that could cost the single father the very children he is trying so desperately to protect. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. Jake's internal alarm clock, fueled by perpetual anxiety, jolts him awake at 3:30 a.m. every day in the cab of his truck, the only shelter he has known since they lost the farm, a town that thrives on tourists but offers nothing but struggle for the working poor like him. His routine begins with making stale toast and instant coffee over a portable propane stove for his children, before driving the rattling Silverado an hour and a half to the nearest construction site in Omaha, where he works grueling 12-hour shifts hauling drywall and brick, his body aching perpetually from the relentless physical labor that barely covers the cost of cheap motel rooms or gas for the truck. The constant, suffocating strain of balancing the bills, gas, cheap food, the children's minimal school supplies, and the ever-present fear of the Silverado's engine finally giving out, has etched permanent lines of exhaustion and worry onto his face, forcing him to live every single day on a razor's edge of financial insecurity, one unexpected expense away from utter homelessness, constantly calculating the thin, unforgiving margins of survival. He hasn't had a proper night's sleep or a moment of peace since his former life crumbled, the memories of comfort and stability now feeling like a distant, impossible dream, a cruel joke played by a merciless universe. The quiet moments in the evening, when Lily and Noah are finally asleep, cuddled together in the sleeping bags in the back seat, are spent poring over classified ads and expired coupons, trying desperately to stretch his meager paycheck just enough to cover the barest essentials, knowing that any dream of a college fund or a better life for his children feels impossibly distant, a painful illusion he can no longer afford to maintain. He often catches his reflection in the greasy side mirror and sees a stranger, a man whose dreams were not merely deferred but violently crushed, whose youthful optimism was obliterated by the brutal pressure of simply trying to keep his family intact. But he always manages to put on a brave, cheerful, and overly optimistic face for Lily and Noah, knowing he is their only rock, their only source of stability in a world that has failed them utterly. And that single thought fuels his daily, agonizing grind. This unrelenting routine is a suffocating, invisible cycle of modern poverty, a trap that restricts his every opportunity for change and improvement. And the gas issue on the highway tonight feels like the universe's final, mocking act of cruelty. The breaking point in his already stretched existence, a moment of profound, dangerous vulnerability where his defenses are lowest. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. Jake's deepest, most persistent pain isn't the current financial struggle. It's the profound, agonizing guilt over the failure of his marriage and the resulting loss of his family home and farm. A trauma that sits like a cold, heavy stone in his gut and influences every decision he makes, especially his reluctance to trust any new person or seek external help, preferring to carry his immense burden alone. His wife, Sarah, didn't just walk out. She left after a massive, irreconcilable argument about his refusal to sell their ancestral farm, a debt-ridden piece of land he passionately insisted on keeping, promising his ailing father he would find a way to make it profitable. A promise he now sees as the fatal flaw that destroyed his family, leaving him with an immense, crushing weight of failure and regret. He still secretly keeps a faded, creased photograph of the three of them, a young, smiling family full of hope standing proudly in front of the farmhouse. Tucked into the visor of the Silverado, a constant, sharp, silent reminder of the future he sacrificed and the happiness he failed to protect. A phantom limb of a life that could have been and a brutal marker of his poor judgment. The subsequent shame of losing the farm and the closure of his father's small tractor repair shop. The final, humiliating failure after his father's death and Sarah's hasty departure. Still burns like acid, a visible scar on his self-worth, making him feel like a permanent disappointment, a man who couldn't protect his family, his legacy, or his children from the hard reality of homelessness. Lily often asks innocent, heartbreaking questions about why they can't go back to the big house with the barn, and why her mother never calls or visits, questions Jake fields with strained, vague, protective answers about mommy needing time for herself and a new job, lying through his teeth to shield his daughter from the raw, ugly truth of abandonment, and each lie chips away at his already fragile soul, solidifying his agonizing isolation. He knows that his inability to move on, to accept genuine help, or to trust any new person entering their lives stems directly from the gaping, emotional wound Sarah inflicted, a defense mechanism built on the ruins of his former life, a protective wall against any further emotional catastrophe, no matter how small or seemingly benign, turning him into a deeply isolated and guarded individual. This profound sense of failure makes his current life feel like a perpetual penance, a silent belief that he deserves this unending struggle for making the wrong choice years ago, and this subconscious feeling makes him highly vulnerable to external manipulation, a man easily taken advantage of because he inherently feels unworthy of good fortune or any positive change in his devastating circumstances. What happened next would shock everyone. In the grueling, monotonous days leading up to the fateful highway breakdown, a series of minor, unsettling anomalies had subtly but persistently peppered Jake's already stressed routine, small disturbances in the predictable fabric of his life that he had simply dismissed as extreme bad luck or sheer paranoia due to chronic exhaustion, never linking them to a coordinated threat. 3 mornings ago, while at the local Love's Travel stop buying coffee and cheap gas, he was certain he saw a sleek, dark sedan, the kind of expensive, unmarked car he usually only sees in movie thrillers, parked awkwardly down the street from the dilapidated, temporary motel where they were staying, its tinted windows facing his room, its occupants seemingly watching their modest, struggling existence. But when he went outside to check, the car was instantly gone, leaving him with a creeping, undeniable sense of being silently observed. His usually reliable, prepaid burner phone had been acting increasingly strangely, randomly dropping important calls with potential employers or making peculiar, static-filled noises during conversations with Lily's school counselor, which he initially blamed on the cheap service provider but which now, in retrospect, feels like deliberate, orchestrated interference, a calculated, technical sabotage designed to further isolate and neutralize him. More bizarrely, the landlord of the last week's rented room, a notoriously unfriendly man who never spoke to tenants, had unexpectedly warned him, in a cryptic, hurried, and almost frightened manner, to watch his back, Ryan, and not stay in one place too long, before quickly retreating indoors and refusing any further questions, A warning that seemed nonsensical at the time but now echoes in his exhausted mind with an ominous new significance as he stares at the strange woman on the highway. The night security guard at his Omaha construction site had mentioned that someone was asking very specific, intrusive, and personal questions about Jake's exact work schedule, his lunch breaks, and the children's pickup times, questions that the guard found aggressive and unsettling, but Jake, in his characteristic exhaustion, had brushed off as simple, nosy workplace gossip, tragically failing to grasp the coordinated, high-level nature of the inquiries. These were not random or isolated incidents. They were subtle, orchestrated pressures, tightening the invisible circle around him, a meticulously planned prelude to the major disruption that was about to occur. A slow burn setup for the high-stakes drama he was unknowingly about to step into, but his mind, consumed with immediate concerns like rent and food, completely failed to connect the complex, sinister dots. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. The intense heat of the Nebraska late afternoon is fading rapidly, giving way to the cold emptiness of the plains night, and visibility is worsening due to the dust storm. But Jake has momentarily forgotten his flat tire, his focus entirely on the terrifying woman huddled by the abandoned luxury car. A striking image of wealth utterly ruined by unseen forces, completely disrupting his planned escape route. He approaches the woman, Ilara, cautiously, his natural instinct to protect his children overriding his immense fear of getting involved in something clearly dangerous and far beyond his control. The sight of the expensive, untouched car and the desperation in her eyes screaming a warning he cannot ignore. Ilara is impeccably dressed in a severe, expensive black business suit, a sharp contrast to the dusty road, and her perfect appearance is marred only by a trickle of dried blood near her temple and the white-knuckle grip she maintains on the worn leather satchel, which she treats not as luggage but as a desperate, final lifeline, the only thing keeping her afloat in a sea of unknown threats. She barely registers his presence, her eyes constantly flicking between the empty highway and the back window of the Tesla, clearly not worried about the car itself but terrified of what might be pursuing her. Her silence more unnerving than any scream or plea for help, suggesting a deep, disciplined terror that refuses to manifest in outward panic. Jake offers her the only thing he has, a slightly dirty blanket and a half-full bottle of water, and in that moment, she finally turns her attention to him, her eyes, usually cold and calculating, suddenly softening with a flicker of raw, unmasked desperation, seeing him not as a rescue but perhaps as the last, safest anchor in her violent, rapidly unraveling world. She speaks only one word, her voice a dry, strained whisper that seems to cost her immense effort. Please, a single, raw syllable that carries the weight of a lifetime of untold secrets and imminent danger. A plea for not just help, but absolute, unquestioning, and instant protection, completely shattering the wall of wealth and composure she had maintained. He feels an immediate, visceral conflict, the rational voice screaming at him to take his children and drive away, mind his own business and preserve his last ounce of stability. Yet the inherent decency instilled by his father and the deep-seated empathy developed from his own suffering compel him to stay, knowing that leaving her there would violate the core of who he is as a man. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. The plea from Ilara is potent and unnerving, but Jake's instinctual need to protect Lily and Noah acts as a formidable, non-negotiable barrier to his immediate impulse to offer sanctuary, leading to a tense, silent standoff on the side of the desolate highway, with the approaching night amplifying the already acute sense of danger. He steps back, his hands held up in a gesture of non-engagement, and despite the growing sense of urgency, he lays out his non-negotiable terms, his voice rough but firm. Lady, I have 2 kids in that truck. We're running on fumes and luck. I can't get involved in something that's going to get us killed. What are you running from? I need to know now. A desperate attempt to gather enough information to rationally weigh the risk against his moral obligation, though deep down he knows the answers will only frighten him more. Ilara avoids the direct question, her professional training instantly kicking in, and instead focuses her response on a counteroffer that speaks directly to his visible poverty and desperation, a calculated move to appeal to his most acute pain point, subtly shifting the dynamic of the encounter. She gestures vaguely towards the luxury car and then the satchel, her voice regaining a fraction of its corporate steel. There is more than enough in that car and this bag to make all your current problems irrelevant. Just drive me 30 miles north, past the next county line. You won't regret it, but you need to decide in the next 5 minutes. An offer that is both an immense temptation and a terrifying warning, implying a danger that is rapidly closing in on them both, and underscoring the high stakes of her escape. The sheer scale of the bribe, the casual dismissal of the luxury car, the veiled promise of life-changing money, hits Jake with staggering force, instantly addressing every financial anxiety that plagues his waking life, making the temptation incredibly difficult to ignore, a direct challenge to his hard-won principles. He glances at Lily and Noah watching him from the Silverado's window, their small, trusting faces the ultimate reminder of his duty, and the image of his deceased father, a man who always chose integrity over profit, flashes through his mind, forcing him to momentarily reject the glittering bait of the easy way out. He realizes that accepting the money without understanding the source or the threat is the quickest path back to the kind of moral compromise that initially destroyed his life, making him acutely aware that this sudden gift is likely a poison chalice, forcing him to stand firm in his refusal to be bought. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. The standoff reaches its critical, defining moment, not because of a sudden change of heart or a massive monetary increase, but due to a small, almost imperceptible detail in Alara's terrified composure and a sudden, audible increase in the sound of an approaching vehicle, forcing Jake's hand into an irreversible act of desperate mercy. Alara, seeing his refusal to be bought by the promised wealth, drops her corporate facade completely, the mask shattering to reveal the raw, unprotected human underneath, and she murmurs, "They will kill me, not because of the money, but because of what I know." They're already on the system, a cryptic, panicked statement that finally convinces Jake that her life is genuinely in imminent danger, and that her fight is not about simple theft, but about exposure of something far more sinister and systemically dangerous. The faint but unmistakable sound of a powerful engine accelerating in the distance, cutting through the silence of the plains, completely eclipses the sound of the wind, signaling that the theoretical danger has just become terrifyingly, physically real, providing the terrifying deadline that Jake was subconsciously waiting for before committing to action. He takes a deep, ragged breath, the final, desperate plea in Alara's eyes and the imminent threat overwhelming his rational self-preservation. And he makes the decision that defines his character. "All right, get in the truck. You don't say a word to my kids. The satchel stays covered. We are going to my only safe place, and you better hope it's far enough." A command that immediately binds his life and the fate of his children to the desperate escape of this mysterious woman and her untold secrets, a point of no return. As he helps her quickly scramble into the back seat, pushing the satchel under the threadbare floor mat, Jake catches sight of a chilling detail on the Tesla's polished trunk. A small, nearly invisible, but highly advanced GPS tracker flashing a tiny red light, confirming that the pursuers are using high-level technology and are likely only minutes behind, solidifying the terrifying reality of the danger they have just invited into their lives. The fear that grips him now is immense, not for his own life, but for the devastating consequences this selfless act might bring upon Lily and Noah, a risk he now has to live with and defend at all costs, understanding that his compassion has just made them the primary targets in a game far beyond their comprehension. At that moment, everything started to change. The immediate, brutal consequence of Jake's decision manifests before they have even traveled a mile, serving as a terrifying, painful confirmation that he has indeed stepped into a world of high-stakes danger where mistakes are not tolerated and the enemy moves with ruthless, corporate efficiency. They barely manage to pull the rattling Silverado back onto the highway when the engine, already struggling, suddenly gives out completely, not with a sputtering cough, but with a sharp, catastrophic metallic grind and a thick plume of acrid, black smoke billowing from under the hood. A sudden, irreversible mechanical failure that leaves them completely stranded in the most vulnerable possible location. The irony of the situation a cruel, mocking punch to his gut. Alara, looking through the rear window, points with a shaky finger back down the road. The powerful engine sound they had heard earlier now materializes into a sleek, unmarked, black Dodge Charger, moving at terrifying speed, clearly having been waiting in the distance for them to make their move and now closing in rapidly, indicating that the failure was almost certainly not a coincidence but a precisely timed act of electronic sabotage designed to neutralize their only means of escape. The black Charger slows briefly by the abandoned Tesla, where two men in identical, severe black suits quickly and professionally retrieve something small from the vehicle. Likely confirming the GPS data, before accelerating again, their intent unmistakable, their speed and professionalism screaming that they are not common criminals but highly trained corporate or governmental operatives, making the threat exponentially more terrifying and immediate. Jake frantically grabs his children and Alara, shouting, "Out! Now! We run!" forcing them to abandon the last shred of protection the truck offered and plunging them directly into the immediate danger. Sprinting into the dry, thorny scrubland adjacent to the highway, the desperate fear of being caught overwhelming his shame at leaving his only possession, the Silverado, to be potentially destroyed or stolen. The loss of the truck, his shelter, his transportation, his job security, his connection to stability, is a devastating blow, a symbol of everything he has sacrificed and lost, a painful confirmation that his first act of selflessness has cost him the last tangible link to his old life, making the stakes absolutely immense and irreversible. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. The desperate flight through the dense, thorny scrubland quickly descends into a harrowing nightmare, and the world Jake thought he knew, a world defined by hard work and honest struggle, begins to visibly crumble under the focused, merciless pressure of the corporate pursuers, revealing a terrifying new reality where he is completely outmatched and exposed. The two men from the black Charger, led by a ruthless, cold-eyed individual later identified as Sterling, emerge from the car and immediately begin a systematic, professional search of the surrounding area, not bothering to chase wildly but moving with chilling, coordinated efficiency, using advanced thermal optics and seemingly communicating with someone remotely, confirming that they are being hunted by highly funded, well-equipped operatives who view them as nothing more than expendable targets. Later that night, having found temporary, desperate refuge in a long-abandoned, decaying barn, Jake attempts to check his prepaid burner phone to call a distant, reluctant cousin for help, only to find the phone is completely useless. The battery is dead, but more disturbingly, the screen has a small, melted burn mark on the circuit, a subtle sign of high-intensity electronic disruption that confirms the enemy can not only track but also remotely disable their only means of external communication, isolating them completely. Alara, now calmer but still guarded, finally reveals a few crucial, terrifying details while clutching the satchel. She worked for the Hawthorne Group, a massive, seemingly untouchable energy and finance conglomerate based in Dallas, and the satchel contains proprietary evidence that exposes a multi-billion-dollar fraud scheme. A scheme that could collapse the company and land several very powerful individuals, including the CEO, in federal prison, explaining the extreme life-or-death measures being taken to silence her. The revelation instantly elevates the danger from a simple criminal pursuit to a high-level corporate war, placing Jake and his children directly in the crosshairs of a ruthless, seemingly omnipotent enemy with unlimited resources, making their current situation exponentially more precarious and terrifying. He realizes with a profound, sinking sense of dread that he is not just protecting a woman. He is protecting the downfall of one of America's largest, most secretive corporations, and his small, honest life has just been vaporized by a catastrophe of global financial proportions. What happened next would shock everyone. Having managed to evade Sterling's initial search through sheer luck and local knowledge, the emotional and psychological toll of the encounter hits Jake with devastating force the next morning when the massive reach of the Hawthorne Group completely crushes his life, not with violence, but with a public, humiliating act of corporate destruction that leaves him utterly exposed and financially ruined. While hiding in the dilapidated barn, using a cracked cell phone he found inside, Jake risks a moment to check his social media and the local news website for any reports on the abandoned car, only to find the entire front page dominated not by the accident, but by a sensationalized article featuring a blurred photo of his face, labeling him a prime suspect in a major interstate kidnapping case and a potential flight risk in a completely fabricated police report that also accuses him of stealing his own truck. Simultaneously, a desperate call he makes to his only remaining contact, his site foreman in Omaha, results in a curt, cold dismissal. He has been immediately terminated for cause, his meager final paycheck already suspended due to unforeseen legal complications and corporate pressure, an action that confirms the Hawthorne Group's total control over local resources and their merciless intent to erase him entirely, not just physically, but professionally and reputationally. The humiliation is absolute. His reputation as an honest, hardworking man is instantly destroyed, replaced by the public label of a desperate criminal and a kidnapper, a narrative carefully crafted and disseminated by the corporate machine to ensure no one would dare offer him shelter or assistance, effectively cutting off every single avenue of legal and financial help. He sees the pain and confusion in Lily's eyes as she overhears him arguing with the foreman. The understanding that their last semblance of stability, his job, is now gone, and that moment of shame, of failing to protect his children from the ugly truth of their situation, is more crushing than any physical threat or financial loss, leaving him feeling utterly isolated and completely defenseless against the pervasive power of his unseen, malicious enemies. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. Just as the public humiliation reaches its peak and Jake is wrestling with the agonizing reality of his total isolation, a new, completely unexpected character enters their desperate situation. A presence that complicates the dynamic with an immediate layer of distrust and a massive increase in the palpable, suffocating tension within the tiny, decaying confines of the barn. As the group hunkers down for a long, dangerous day, an old, almost silent Harley-Davidson Fat Boy motorcycle pulls up to the barn entrance, and off steps Marcus, 50s, huge, heavily bearded, dressed in clean, functional riding leather, with a distinctive, faded tattoo of a military insignia on his thick neck. A man whose sheer size and commanding presence immediately scream of danger, competence, and a life lived on the violent fringes, making him a terrifying addition to their delicate ecosystem of fear. Marcus announces, in a low, rumbling voice that cuts through the silence, that he is an acquaintance of Alara's and that he received a cryptic, coded message from a prearranged dead drop, claiming he is there to provide extraction and transport. A claim that Alara immediately and suspiciously confirms with only a single guarded nod, avoiding eye contact with Jake, a silent communication that instantly raises Jake's hackles and fuels his already acute paranoia. The immediate tension between Jake and Marcus is thick enough to cut with a knife. Jake sees Marcus as a dangerous interloper, a potential mercenary or a double agent sent by the same people they are running from, while Marcus views Jake as an uninvited, highly amateur complication, a fragile liability who is slowing down the essential operation and increasing the risk for everyone involved. Marcus wastes no time, immediately taking control of the tactical situation, quickly securing the barn's weak entrance points and establishing a perimeter watch, demonstrating a level of professional training and decisive authority that simultaneously terrifies and slightly reassures Jake, making him realize that they have, for better or worse, acquired a highly skilled protector, albeit one whose true allegiance remains terrifyingly uncertain. The introduction of Marcus, who is clearly not bound by the law or conventional morality, completely shatters the already fragile sense of trust Jake was building with Alara, forcing him to keep both eyes perpetually open, now facing the possibility of betrayal not only from the outside but from within their own desperate, makeshift sanctuary. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. The introduction of Marcus, the supposed acquaintance and unexpected savior, only serves to amplify the profound confusion and paranoia surrounding Alara's mission, forcing Jake to constantly reassess who he can trust and what the real stakes of this desperate game truly are. A mental chess match that further drains his already depleted emotional reserves. Marcus, with his military precision and unnerving silence, immediately starts issuing cryptic demands regarding the satchel, referring to its contents not as evidence or proof, but as the package, asking Alara pointed technical questions about encryption keys and satellite transmission windows, details that suggest he is less of a personal bodyguard and more of a specialized asset hired to ensure the safe delivery of something far more valuable and politically charged than simple corporate fraud documents. Alara herself, once desperate and completely reliant on Jake's kindness, suddenly becomes hyper-professional and distant in Marcus's presence, reverting to a cold, business-like demeanor, only communicating in clipped sentences and veiled glances, a sudden, complete regression that makes Jake question the sincerity of her initial vulnerability and fuels the suspicion that her entire roadside breakdown was a meticulously planned act of manipulation designed to recruit an unsuspecting, trustworthy civilian like himself. Jake manages to corner Alara during a brief moment when Marcus is outside, demanding a full explanation of the relationship and why she didn't mention this professional extraction plan earlier, but Alara simply gives him a glacial stare, her response calculated to create maximum confusion. Marcus is an insurance policy. He doesn't work for me, but he is aligned with the outcome I need. Trust his actions, not his motives. A cryptic, unsatisfying answer that fails to alleviate Jake's fear and instead solidifies the suspicion that he is simply a pawn in a far larger, more sinister corporate or political play. The children, Lily and Noah, also register the dramatic shift in the atmosphere. They instinctively withdraw from Alara's cold new demeanor and visibly flinch whenever Marcus moves suddenly, sensing the acute, silent danger he embodies, forcing Jake to divide his precious attention between tactical survival and the emotional security of his terrified children, a conflict that stretches him to his breaking point. What happened next would shock everyone. The deepening confusion and tactical maneuvers are brutally interrupted by a new act of injustice, a crushing blow far greater and more permanent than the loss of his job or his truck, an event meticulously orchestrated by Sterling and the Hawthorne Group that proves their limitless cruelty and their determination to destroy Jake at his very core. Using the completely fabricated kidnapping narrative and leveraging their immense influence over local authorities, Sterling successfully orchestrates the issuance of a temporary emergency custody order, claiming Jake as a flight risk, mentally unstable and dangerous, utilizing the public slander against him and the children's homelessness as irrefutable evidence of parental neglect and instability, tearing his family apart with a stroke of a pen. The devastating news is delivered by a local sheriff's deputy, a deputy Jake vaguely recognizes from high school, who arrives at the barn after tracking down the abandoned Silverado, his face grim and deeply uncomfortable, informing Jake that he is legally obligated to take Lily and Noah into protective state custody until a full review is conducted, a bureaucratic nightmare designed to be slow, impossible to navigate, and financially ruinous for a man already blacklisted. The moment is sheer, unadulterated agony for Jake. He has to watch helplessly as his beloved children, utterly terrified and sobbing hysterically, are gently but firmly placed in the back of the patrol car, their small hands desperately reaching for him, their cries tearing his heart into a million pieces, a soul-crushing loss that eclipses every financial or physical hardship he has endured so far, reducing him to a state of complete, paralyzed despair. The profound injustice of the situation is unbearable. He risked his life, his freedom, and his last remaining asset to do the right thing and protect an innocent person, and his reward is the brutal, legal theft of his children, a corporate strategy designed to break him completely and force him to surrender the satchel in exchange for his family's release. He collapses to his knees in the dust, the sound of the retreating patrol car the most terrible sound he has ever heard, realizing that the Hawthorne Group has found his ultimate, unassailable weakness, his love for his children, and has used the very system he trusted to destroy him utterly. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. The forced removal of Lily and Noah, the central anchors of his existence, immediately plunges Jake into the deepest, darkest abyss of despair, marking the moment when he effectively loses everything tangible and intangible that mattered, leaving him a hollow shell driven only by a primal, desperate need for retribution. The loss of the children, combined with the earlier loss of his ancestral home, his good name, his job, and his only vehicle, means that Jake is now completely isolated, legally criminalized, and financially zeroed out. A man with no possessions, no future, and no legal standing. A direct, devastating consequence of his selfless choice to help a mysterious stranger on the highway, making his earlier act of kindness feel like a catastrophic, existential mistake. The rage and grief that consume him are suffocating. He has nothing left to protect, only a burning, consuming need to fight back, a desperate, reckless energy born from the trauma of watching his children taken away by the very system he was trying to protect them from, transforming him from a reluctant helper into a man with nothing left to lose. He turns on Alara with a cold, terrifying fury, demanding to know the exact price of the satchel's contents, the truth behind the corporate fraud, realizing that if he has already paid the ultimate price, his family, the information must be worth the complete destruction of the Hawthorne Group, the only goal that now matters to him, the only path to potentially reclaiming his children. Alara, despite the terrifying nature of his grief, remains coldly composed, offering him only a guarded piece of information. The evidence proves the CEO and a senior board member laundered nearly $3 billion through shell corporations. If this gets out, their lives are over and the company collapses. That is the price you paid, a revelation that confirms the immense, existential stakes of their fight and the utter hopelessness of facing such powerful, ruthless enemies. Marcus steps in, his face unreadable, putting a massive hand on Jake's shoulder, not in comfort, but in warning, whispering, "Control it. Grief is a weakness they will exploit. Now we fight." A cold, pragmatic call to arms that forces Jake to channel his overwhelming despair into the only remaining option. Absolute, total, and reckless warfare against the forces that ripped his children from him. What happened next would shock everyone. The profound, agonizing loss of his children and the crushing weight of utter powerlessness bring Jake to the brink of complete surrender. A moment of deep, existential despair where the temptation to simply give up, return to the authorities, confess to the fabricated charges, and beg for the release of Lily and Noah becomes almost irresistible, threatening to derail the entire mission. Huddled alone in the abandoned barn while Alara and Marcus watch the perimeter, Jake pulls out the faded photograph of his family. The image of Sarah, Lily, Noah, and the old farmhouse, and the tears finally, silently, flow down his rugged, unshaven face, the image of his smiling children, a physical, agonizing pain in his chest, making him question the entire, catastrophic chain of events that led him here. He grabs the satchel, holding it with a mixture of hatred and despair, contemplating simply walking out, leaving it on the highway, and submitting himself to whatever fate the corporate machine has planned for him, believing that his life and his dignity are a small, acceptable price to pay for the chance, however slim, to hug his children one last time and reassure them that their father is not a criminal. He rationalizes the betrayal. Alara is a stranger, Marcus is a mercenary, and the corporate fight is not his to win. His only true loyalty is to Lily and Noah, and if surrendering the evidence means they are returned to him, then the fight is over, the satchel is meaningless, and his principles are a luxury he can no longer afford, the weight of his father's moral code crumbling under the pressure of his paternal obligation. It is the lowest, most dangerous moment of the entire journey, a moment where the overwhelming pain of loss almost eclipses his righteous anger and the possibility of a moral compromise, the very thing he fought his whole life against, is now the most tempting and logical path to end his unbearable suffering and secure his children's immediate future. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. Just as the darkness of near surrender threatens to consume Jake entirely, a small, completely unexpected gesture from the most unlikely source, the emotionally cold and relentlessly professional Alara, cuts through his despair, a tiny flicker of human warmth that briefly rekindles the dying flame of his hope and reminds him that there is still something worth fighting for beyond his immediate, crushing grief. Alara, having sensed his imminent collapse through her own practiced detachment, silently slips a small, folded piece of paper into his hand as he sits in the darkness, a move that is entirely nonverbal and completely uncharacteristic of her severe, guarded demeanor, a rare, momentary breach of her corporate armor that speaks volumes about her own hidden capacity for empathy and her quiet assessment of his character. The note is not a technical instruction or a tactical warning. It is a single, concise sentence. "I know where they are. We get them back after we finish this," followed by a single, carefully drawn, small flower, a subtle but unmistakable reference to a tiny wildflower Lily had picked and given to Jake on the day of the breakdown, a detail that Alara could only have noticed during the chaos of their escape, proving that she had been observing and quietly cataloging the human cost of their shared flight. The effect on Jake is instantaneous and transformative. The note is not a bribe, but a promise, a direct acknowledgement of his children's suffering and a powerful commitment to making their safe return the absolute priority once the mission is complete, replacing his crushing despair with a burning, laser-focused purpose. He realizes that this highly calculated, seemingly heartless woman is not just a corporate operative. She is now a co-conspirator who recognizes the immense debt she owes him, and she has promised him the only currency that matters, the safe return of Lily and Noah, a commitment that instantly galvanizes his resolve, pulling him back from the moral precipice of surrender and transforming his grief into a sharp, unyielding weapon. At that moment, everything started to change. Fueled by Alara's powerful promise and the renewed sense of purpose, Jake dives back into the mission, examining the contents of the satchel with a fresh, aggressive focus, quickly uncovering a strange, completely unexpected piece of information that immediately injects a profound layer of personal meaning into the corporate fight, intertwining his past failures with Alara's dangerous present. While meticulously sorting through the encrypted financial ledgers and shell company diagrams, Jake stumbles upon a seemingly innocuous, small, handwritten receipt tucked inside one of the classified files. A receipt for a specific, large, and completely unnecessary piece of specialized agricultural equipment purchased years ago through one of the Hawthorne shell corporations, a financial transaction that makes no sense in the context of global finance and energy. The chilling discovery is that this specific piece of equipment, listed with its unique serial number and the date of purchase, is the exact same piece of equipment that his father, Jake Sr., had been desperately trying to purchase years ago to save the farm, a purchase that was mysteriously blocked, delayed, and ultimately denied by a powerful, anonymous lending body right before the farm went into foreclosure, leading directly to the argument with Sarah and the complete collapse of his family. The receipt is the final, undeniable proof that the Hawthorne Group, the same ruthless corporation that Alara is fleeing from, was directly involved in the corporate machinations that led to the collapse of his family farm, not through coincidence or legitimate market forces, but through calculated, malicious, and illegal manipulation designed to acquire the land cheaply for their own nefarious financial purposes, making the struggle instantly personal. The rage that consumes Jake is immense, fueled by the realization that his entire life, his failures, and the loss of his family were not the result of bad choices or misfortune, but the direct, calculated action of the very corporate entity he is now hiding from, turning the fight from a matter of morality into a desperate, existential quest for personal revenge and justice for his father's legacy. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. The horrifying discovery linking the Hawthorne Group directly to the malicious destruction of his family farm and his subsequent financial ruin instantly shatters the last vestige of Jake's belief in a fair and just world, solidifying the profound suspicion that every catastrophic event in his life, including the initial chance encounter on the highway, was orchestrated or manipulated by unseen, powerful hands. He immediately connects the dots. The mysteriously blocked equipment purchase, the sudden, aggressive nature of the bank foreclosure, Sarah's unexplained, abrupt departure immediately after, the loss of his job, and even the coincidental engine failure of his truck on the highway. All of it now screams of a long-term, calculated campaign of corporate destruction designed to erase him and his father's legacy, proving that nothing in his life has been left to chance. Only relentless, cruel, corporate pressure. Jake confronts Alara with the receipt and his terrifying realization, his voice shaking not with fear, but with righteous, consuming anger, demanding to know if she was personally involved in the original corporate takeover of his land, or if her accidental meeting with him on the side of the road was itself a calculated move to recruit a man whose life had already been meticulously ruined by the very people she was running from. Alara maintains her composure, but her face visibly pales at the evidence, admitting only that the CEO of Hawthorne, Alexander Vance, has a long history of acquiring assets and silencing dissent through highly irregular, aggressive, and often criminal means, but she vehemently denies any prior knowledge of his farm, although her inability to meet his eyes leaves a cold, nagging doubt in Jake's mind that lingers like poison. Marcus, ever the pragmatic operative, interrupts the confrontation, pointing out that whether the meeting was planned or not is irrelevant, because the fact is that Jake is now the only person with both the motive, revenge, and the integrity proven by his rejection of the bribe, to see the mission through, suggesting that even if he was used, he is now the crucial, unpredictable weapon they need to deliver the final, fatal blow to the corporation. This realization that he has been both a victim and a key player completely transforms his perspective. His anger is now channeled into a burning, strategic resolve, realizing that he has an intimate, personal understanding of the enemy that Alara and Marcus can never truly possess, and he is now fighting not for them, but for his father, his children, and his ruined name. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. The tactical planning and renewed resolve are immediately destabilized by the sickening, unavoidable feeling of a deep, psychological betrayal, a profound realization that the entire foundation of Alara's narrative might be built upon a gigantic, calculated lie designed to secure her own survival, throwing Jake into a maelstrom of paralyzing doubt. While working on decrypting the final layer of the satchel's files, Jake notices a small, almost invisible discrepancy in the original timeline Alara provided. a date in one of the financial documents that suggests she transferred a massive sum of money out of an offshore account 2 days before her accidental breakdown on the highway, a timeline inconsistency that screams of pre-planning, not frantic flight, making the accidental nature of their encounter increasingly suspect. He confronts her again, this time with cold, hard evidence, demanding the absolute truth. Did she fake the breakdown? Was he simply a convenient, innocent shield? Did she intentionally choose him because his background made him the perfect, desperate victim to take the fall? Alara's response is evasive and riddled with half-truths, confirming that yes, the breakdown was staged, but only because she needed to break off all electronic tracking and communication in a specific desolate area, the area where she knew Jake, a man with low-level tech and high integrity, would likely be passing through. But she vehemently denies knowing about his farm, claiming she only sought out a man she could trust after researching local profiles of self-employed, moral but struggling individuals. The partial confession, although providing a tactical explanation, is a devastating emotional betrayal for Jake. He realizes he was indeed selected and used, his kindness and his struggle ruthlessly leveraged to serve her corporate agenda, a wound that cuts deeper than any physical attack, making him feel like a naive fool who sacrificed his children for a staged performance. He retreats emotionally, feeling utterly hollowed out and unable to look Alara in the eye, realizing that while her cause might be just, her methods are just as manipulative and cold-blooded as those of the corporate enemies they are fighting, confirming that he is completely alone in his moral integrity. What happened next would shock everyone. The confirmation of Alara's manipulation and the cold, calculated nature of their initial meeting. The great lie triggers the strongest emotional fall Jake has yet experienced, a crippling wave of self-hatred and moral exhaustion that threatens to paralyze his ability to fight, leaving him emotionally bankrupt and teetering on the edge of a complete breakdown. He is not just angry. He is utterly devastated by the realization that his selfless act of kindness, the decision that cost him his children and his good name, was a predicted and exploited factor in a high-stakes corporate game, making him feel like a puppet whose strings were pulled by a woman whose ruthlessness rivals her father's. The failure to protect his children from being taken away now feels doubly excruciating because it was not due to an honest mistake, but the direct, calculated result of his own exploitable morality, leading to a crippling wave of self-recrimination that accuses him of being too naive, too weak, and too slow to understand the brutal realities of the world. He sits alone in the darkness of the barn, unable to speak, his mind racing through every mistake, every moment he trusted her, every lie he accepted, and the crushing weight of his failure to prevent the worst day of his life leaves him feeling utterly broken and unfit to be a father, a self-condemnation far worse than any sentence the Hawthorne Group could inflict upon him. Marcus, who had been observing his emotional state, speaks only a single, brutal truth intended to shake him out of his paralysis. Self-pity won't save your kids, Jake. Your despair is a luxury. Your only purpose now is to get the transmission code or your failure becomes permanent. A harsh, pragmatic statement that cuts through the paralysis but replaces his grief with a burning, cynical determination to finish the job not out of idealism, but out of a desperate need for revenge and the chance to simply see his children again, reducing his motivation to a primal, transactional survival instinct. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. Following the psychological devastation of the great lie and his emotional collapse, Jake retreats into a state of total, functional isolation, becoming emotionally inaccessible and completely alone despite the physical presence of Alara and Marcus, transforming him into a cold, ruthless instrument focused solely on the completion of the mission and the retrieval of his children. He ceases all non-essential communication with Alara, treating her not as an ally or a co-conspirator, but as a purely transactional necessity, a living source of information required to complete the task. His face set in a permanent, unforgiving mask of betrayal and distrust, refusing to engage in any personal conversation or acknowledge her previous promise to help rescue Lily and Noah. Marcus, sensing the profound shift in Jake's motivation from moral code to cold vengeance, quietly approves, seeing the controlled, intense anger as a massive tactical advantage, and begins treating Jake with a new, subtle layer of respect, acknowledging that the poor single father has been successfully broken down and rebuilt into a more effective, purely goal-oriented weapon, eliminating the previous weakness of his compassionate nature. Jake's sole focus becomes the satchel and the decryption process, working relentlessly on the encrypted files, treating the complex corporate data not as boring paperwork, but as the intricate map to the complete destruction of his enemy, a project of focused personal vengeance that is the only thing standing between him and permanent despair, a project he has internalized as his only path to absolution. The most painful aspect of this isolation is his psychological distance from the memory of his children. He has to deliberately wall off the memory of Lily and Noah, burying the agony of their separation under layers of technical data and tactical planning, knowing that allowing the raw emotion to surface would lead to another catastrophic collapse, leaving him a functional, emotionless automaton whose only driving force is the cold, calculated need for retribution against Alexander Vance. What happened next would shock everyone, despite the self-imposed emotional isolation and the cold focus on revenge. A subtle, profound shift begins to occur in the dynamic between Jake and Alara, a change initiated not by words or apologies, but by Alara's own quiet, professional actions, a silent acknowledgement of the immense debt she owes him and the shared sacrifice they have endured. Alara stops trying to engage Jake personally, respecting his need for space, but she begins subtly taking better care of his physical needs, leaving a fresh thermos of coffee and a portion of her limited food supplies near his decryption station. Small, nonverbal gestures of support that acknowledge his exhaustion and stress without demanding forgiveness or conversation. A quiet form of respect he grudgingly accepts. More significantly, she starts volunteering information about the final stages of the plan that goes beyond the purely tactical, revealing highly specific details about Alexander Vance's personal security and the vulnerability of the final transmission point. Details she had previously guarded closely. A silent offering of trust that is far more meaningful than any verbal apology, proving that she views him as a full partner, not just a desperate pawn. She also quietly, and against Marcus's stern warnings, begins leaving a printed, blurry photo of Lily and Noah near his workspace, knowing that even though he walls off his emotions, the constant visual reminder of his purpose is the ultimate, non-negotiable fuel for his resolve. A deeply personal and risky move that confirms her commitment to their safe return. Jake notices these small, silent acts of deference and support. He doesn't react, doesn't thank her, and doesn't change his cold demeanor, but internally, the solid, frozen wall of his complete distrust begins to develop tiny, almost imperceptible cracks, forced open by her quiet persistence and the shared, immense weight of their immense, self-imposed isolation and suffering. A realization that in the face of such a terrifying external enemy, they truly only have each other. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. Just as the final transmission code is cracked and the moment for their desperate move is at hand, a new, completely unexpected ally materializes out of the tactical darkness. A figure whose unique background and technical expertise provide the essential final piece of the puzzle. A resource they never knew they needed, dramatically altering the odds and raising the stakes of their immediate survival. Marcus receives a cryptic, encoded message on his secure radio, and without explanation, a battered, unmarked utility van pulls up to the barn, and out steps Dr. Chun, 60s, impeccably dressed but weary, a former, disgraced security analyst for a rival corporation, now living off-grid. A man whose presence immediately screams of highly specialized technical competence and a deep, personal vendetta against the power structures of corporate America. Dr. Chun is not there for money or loyalty to Alara. He is there because he saw the anonymous data leak they orchestrated earlier, the small strategic move that confirmed the corruption, and he views the complete takedown of the Hawthorne Group as his own personal, final revenge against the corporate system that unjustly destroyed his career years ago, making him an invaluable, highly motivated addition to their desperate team. Chen's specialty is counter-surveillance and signal jamming, a skill set that is immediately critical. He quickly discovers that Sterling hasn't just been tracking Jake's movements but has placed a highly advanced, remote-activated kill switch on the decrypted data, designed to wipe the evidence the moment the transmission is initiated. A terrifying revelation that would have resulted in an immediate, catastrophic failure and their complete capture. Using a complex, jury-rigged array of satellite dishes and signal processors, he pulls from the back of his van. Dr. Chun immediately sets up a powerful, localized jamming field and a secure, parallel network, creating a tactical bubble of silence and immunity that completely blinds Sterling's electronic surveillance team, giving Jake and Alara the necessary window of immunity to transmit the data safely, turning the tables on their technologically superior pursuers. At that moment, everything started to change. As Dr. Chun finalizes the counter-surveillance and Jake prepares to initiate the catastrophic data transmission, the haunting memory of his past, the destruction of his father's legacy and the loss of his farm, comes rushing back to the surface with immense, renewed force, serving as the final, absolute motivator for his ultimate, irreversible act of revenge. While Dr. Chun is rerouting the signal, Jake and Alara find a moment of tense, final privacy, and Jake, no longer seeking an apology, simply shares the story of his father's broken dream and the corporate sabotage that led to his family's ruin. The fact that the very men he is about to expose were the ones who meticulously engineered his poverty and the loss of his children, a deep-seated grievance that gives the impending attack a powerful, intimate layer of personal vengeance. Alara, having listened quietly and respectfully, finally offers a truth she had previously hidden, a truth that completes the circle of their tragic connection. The shell corporation that acquired your land, Horizon Assets, it was controlled by my mother, using my father's funds. I was briefly listed as a non-executive director years ago. I didn't sign the documents, but my name was on the paperwork. I am personally connected to the destruction of your family, Jake. A devastating confession that confirms her indirect responsibility and completely validates Jake's deep-seated anger, giving him the ultimate, righteous moral license to destroy the entire family empire. The full weight of the truth, that the mysterious woman he saved is inextricably linked to the betrayal and ruin of his ancestral life, doesn't break Jake. Instead, it solidifies his resolve, transforming his controlled rage into a cold, unbreakable certainty that his impending action is the only true way to seek absolution and vengeance, making the coming corporate destruction a matter of deeply personal family justice. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. Just as the final encryption keys are loaded and Jake places his finger on the transmit button, the entire mission is placed under an agonizing final test, a desperate, heart-stopping confrontation that forces Jake to choose between instant, personal gratification, seeing his children, and the complete, permanent destruction of his enemy, a moral choice with life-altering consequences. The jamming signal falters momentarily, and a frantic, unexpected call breaks through on one of Marcus's untraceable phones. It's Sterling, his voice laced with venom and triumph, delivering a final, brutal ultimatum. Jake, stop the transmission now. I am 10 minutes away from the safe house where your children are being held. If you transmit, they disappear into the system forever. If you stop, I deliver them personally, unharmed, to the sheriff's office and drop all charges. You have 60 seconds to decide. Poor single father. The threat is immediate, specific, and terrifyingly real, preying directly on Jake's single, remaining vulnerability. His love for Lily and Noah, forcing him to relive the agony of their separation and confront the devastating possibility of their permanent loss, a decision that makes his heart pound against his ribs with brutal force. He looks at the countdown timer on the screen, then at the frantic, pleading expression of Alara, and finally at the stoic, quiet nod of Marcus, who is silently urging him to stay the course, knowing that any compromise now is permanent defeat. Jake realizes that if he accepts the children back now, he forever lives under the Hawthorne Group's shadow, forever subject to their whims and threats, and the ultimate injustice against his father goes unpunished, making their return a gilded cage of corporate control. With a single, shuddering breath, fueled by the memory of his father's honest face and the devastating knowledge of his own ruin, Jake ignores the countdown, slams his hand down on the transmit key, and sends the multi-billion-dollar evidence into the world, choosing permanent justice over temporary, compromised relief. An act of supreme, selfless courage that irrevocably seals his enemy's fate and proves his ultimate, unshakable integrity. At that moment, everything started to change. The second the full data package is successfully transmitted and confirmed by Dr. Chun, triggering a massive, irreversible meltdown of the Hawthorne Group systems, the first great, profound reward for Jake's terrifying courage and immense suffering manifests, not in the form of money, but in the immediate, tangible victory over his physical persecutors. Sterling, having realized that Jake called his bluff and transmitted the evidence, lets out a guttural scream of pure, impotent rage over the phone before abruptly cutting the line, realizing that his powerful, lifelong career is over and his entire world is collapsing in real time, marking the complete psychological defeat of Jake's most relentless enemy. Almost immediately, the tactical jamming field set up by Dr. Chun achieves its second, planned objective. A highly trained, coordinated team of FBI and state police vehicles, which had been tracking Dr. Chen's counter-surveillance signal from a safe distance, instantly swarms the old barn, arresting Marcus, Chun, and Alara, a necessary, prearranged surrender to ensure Alara's safety and the legality of the evidence. But the true reward is what happens next. The lead FBI agent, having been briefed on the situation by a clean source within the Department of Justice who was waiting for the evidence, singles out Jake, not for arrest, but for complete exoneration. "Mr. Ryan, we have immediate orders to drop all charges related to the kidnapping and the stolen vehicle. Your children are safe. They are being returned to the local sheriff's office right now." The immense relief washes over Jake like a physical tidal wave. The knowledge that Lily and Noah are safe and that his name is cleared is the greatest reward imaginable, instantly transforming his grief into overwhelming joy and confirming the validity of his courageous, painful choice. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. With the immediate threat neutralized, his name cleared, and his children secured, Jake finally receives the full, stunning revelation of Alara's true identity and the depth of her motive. A truth that completely rewrites the entire narrative of their chance encounter and validates the immense, terrible price he paid for his integrity. Alara, standing calmly in handcuffs before being led away by the FBI, pauses and looks directly into Jake's eyes, revealing the final, breathtaking truth. "Jake, I am Alara Vance, the daughter of Alexander Vance, the CEO. I used the money my father gave me years ago to secure my independence and find an ally I could trust, someone completely outside his network. I chose you because your profile, the man who would choose his father's promise over his wife's greed, was the only one who showed the kind of integrity I needed to bring down my own blood." She confesses that the satchel was not just evidence. It was the culmination of 2 years of clandestine work, stealing the data and creating the necessary financial paper trail to expose her own corrupt family. A final, monumental act of moral rebellion against the empire that she was born into and that had destroyed Jake's life. The revelation is shattering. The mysterious woman he saved was the vengeful heiress. The poor single father who was ruined by the Vance family had been secretly selected by a Vance to be the instrument of their own destruction. A profound twist of fate that confirms the cosmic justice of his struggle and the intricate, devastating personal connection between their two ruined lives. She offers him no money, only one final, powerful promise whispered as she is led away. "Your father's land, it will be returned, and your children will never struggle again. That is my debt to you, Jake." A commitment that leaves him stunned, emotionally overwhelmed, and finally, completely vindicated in his terrible, beautiful choice. What happened next would shock everyone. 6 months later, the cold, powerful hand of corporate justice has descended fully upon the Hawthorne Group. Alexander Vance, the ruthless CEO, is formally indicted on multiple counts of fraud and money laundering. The company's stock has collapsed into receivership, and Sterling has been sentenced to a long term in federal prison, marking the complete destruction of the empire that ruined Jake's life. The final, powerful promise of Alara Vance is fulfilled. Jake receives the deeds to his ancestral farmhouse and the land, now completely cleared of all debt and legal encumbrances, restored to his name by a discreet, anonymous foundation established by Alara. He is no longer the broken, poor single father sleeping in his truck. He is the respected owner of Ryan Family Farm, with the house completely renovated. A testament to hard work and local community help, and he has successfully reopened his father's old tractor repair shop, thriving on the local business and his restored reputation, finally fulfilling the promise he made to his father years ago. The scene is one of profound, earned peace. Lily and Noah are safe, happy, and thriving, running through the open fields of their own home, with their laughter ringing out in the Nebraska sunset. Their faces no longer marked by fear but by the simple, beautiful security of a stable home and a loving father. Jake stands on the front porch of the newly restored farmhouse, holding a mug of coffee, watching his children play, feeling the complete, total emotional closure of his traumatic journey. He did not accept a bribe, he did not compromise his integrity, and he won back his family, his home, and his honor through pure, honest courage. The final shot is of Jake placing the faded photograph of his family, the one he kept in the truck's visor, onto the mantle of the new fireplace. A silent acknowledgement that the circle of pain is finally broken, replaced by a legacy of justice, integrity, and unconditional love, securing a future where his children will never know the fear of poverty or abandonment again. The struggle was immense, but the victory was complete and absolutely deserved. And that brings us to the end of Jake's fight. A devastating journey that proved the resilience of one single father against an entire corporate empire. Did Jake make the right choice to sacrifice everything for justice? Tell us what you think in the comments below. If this story of betrayal, integrity, and a millionaire twist kept you watching until the very end, we need your help to keep telling these powerful narratives. Smash that subscribe button and hit the bell icon so you never miss a moment of our next true drama. And one final thing. We love connecting with our incredible audience. Tell us right now, from what city and state are you listening to this unforgettable story? Let us know below. We'll see you in the next video.